The gavel hadn't even come down yet, and Dr. Claire Donovan already knew how this was going to end. She sat alone at the long oak table, hands folded in front of her, the fluorescent light of the Ridgemont Memorial boardroom washing everything the same shade of pale, clinical white. 12 board members faced her in a horseshoe. Behind her, in the gallery seats usually reserved for nobody, sat 6 of her colleagues, nurses and residents who'd come on their lunch break because word had gotten around, and word, in a hospital, always gets around, at the center of the horseshoe. Raised half a foot above everyone else on a little wooden dais that made him look taller than he was, sat board chairman Gerald Prout. He had a legal pad in front of him, a fountain pen he never actually used, and the specific, practiced patience of a man who had already decided the outcome and was only enjoying the formality of getting there. "Dr. Donovan," Prout said, not looking up from his notes. "Are you aware that you are here today because this board has received a formal complaint questioning the legitimacy of your surgical credentials?" "I'm aware," Claire said. Her voice was even. 4 years of trauma call had trained the shake out of it a long time ago. Prout finally lifted his eyes. He smiled the way men like him smile when they think kindness and condescension are the same expression. "Then let's not waste anyone's time. 3 years ago." Claire Donovan had walked into Ridgemont Memorial with her RA Summe thinner than any other trauma surgeon on staff, a scar along her left forearm she never explained, and a habit of moving through chaos like it was the only weather she'd ever fully learned to trust. In 3 years, she had never once been late for a code. She had never once lost a patient in the golden hour that another surgeon on staff would likely have lost. None of that was in the folder sitting in front of Gerald Prout. What was in that folder was 3 blank years, an unverifiable overseas assignment, and a chairman who had built his entire career on the belief that blank years were where careers quietly went to die. DISMISSAL, Gerald Prout had chaired the Ridgemont board for 11 years, and in that time he had learned exactly one lesson that mattered to him. Hospitals didn't run on gratitude, they ran on liability. A brilliant surgeon who couldn't produce a clean paper trail wasn't an asset to a place like this. She was a lawsuit with a heartbeat, and Prout had spent the last decade of his career cleaning up other men's messes after they'd let a compelling personality substitute for a verifiable record. 2 years before Claire had ever set foot in Ridgemont, a cardiologist with a similarly thin file had killed a patient on the table, and it had cost the hospital $11 million and Prout's easy nights of sleep. He had promised himself, quietly, that it would never happen again on his watch. He believed, in his own flawed and stubborn way, that what he was doing to Claire Donovan was protecting people. "Your file," Prout said, sliding a folder open in front of him with 2 fingers, like he didn't want to touch it too long, states that between 2016 and 2019, you served as an attached trauma surgeon supporting, and I quote, "forward deployed naval special warfare elements." He let the sentence hang there, distasteful, like something he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. "Dr. Donovan, I've had this office make 3 separate calls to the Department of the Navy this month. Nobody, and I want to stress this, nobody can confirm that unit, that deployment, or your presence within it. That would be because it was classified," Claire said. A ripple went through the board. Prout's smile widened, delighted like she'd handed him the rest of his own argument. "Classified," he repeated, tasting the word. Of course it was. "Doctor, in 11 years on this board, I have heard confidential. I have heard high PA. I have heard pending litigation. I have never once heard a surgeon explain away 3 unaccounted for years of her professional record with the word classified, as if she were a spy novel and not a physician who owes this institution and its patients verifiable proof of competence. I have proof, Claire said quietly. Do you? Prout leaned forward. Because what I have, Doc Donovan, is a resident who says you performed a field cricothyrotomy on a patient in Bay 6 using a ballpoint pen instead of paging anesthesia. I have nurses who say you talk to trauma patients the way a drill instructor talks to recruits. And I have 3 years of your life that, on paper, simply do not exist. He tapped the folder. So no, I don't think you have proof. I think you have a very good story, and I think for 3 years, this hospital has been extraordinarily lucky that your story never got somebody killed. Behind her, Claire heard one of the ER nurses, Denise, who'd worked Bay 6 with her 100 times, start to rise, start to say something. Claire didn't turn around. She lifted 2 fingers off the table, just slightly. Not yet. Denise sat back down, jaw tight, arms crossed hard over her chest. You're suggesting I lied about my service record to get hired, Claire said. I'm suggesting, Prout said, folding his hands, that this board cannot verify a single claim you've made about your own background, and that until we can, your license to practice at this institution is a liability we can no longer carry. His voice softened, almost gentle, which was somehow worse than if he'd shouted. I don't say this with any pleasure, doctor. I've buried a colleague's career for less than what's sitting in this folder. And I've done it because 11 years ago I learned the hard way what happens when this board looks the other way. I'd like to move to a vote on immediate suspension, pending a full credentialing review. Chairman Prout, said one of the younger board members, a woman near the end of the table, don't you think we should at least hear? We are hearing her. Prout said, not unkindly, but final. We've been hearing her for 6 minutes. I'd like to move to a vote. Escalion, beat 1. The vote begins. The room went very still. Prout lifted his pen, the one he never used, like a starting gun. All in favor of immediate suspension of Dr. Donovan's surgical privileges, pending full credentialing review. 3 hands went up immediately. Board members who'd clearly already made up their minds in the hallway before they'd even walked in. A 4th hand rose more slowly, apologetically, from a man who wouldn't meet Claire's eyes. Claire kept her own hands folded on the table. She had promised herself, in the hallway before she'd walked in, that whatever happened in this room, she would not give Gerald Prout the satisfaction of watching her come apart. She could feel Denise's eyes burning into the back of her skull. Furious on her behalf, she didn't turn around. She counted the ceiling tiles instead, the way she used to count them in the surgical break tent, waiting out an artillery barrage that never quite stopped when you wanted it to. Chairman, for the record, said the woman near the end of the table. Her nameplate read Dr. Okafer. Board Secretary, I'd like it noted that I'm voting no, and that I think this entire proceeding has been conducted in bad faith. Noted, Prout said, not looking at her. Motion still requires a simple majority. We have 3 in favor, 1 abstaining, and the rest of you have yet to declare. Beat 2. The interruption, the boardroom door didn't creak. Ridgemont's doors never creaked. They were hydraulic, hospital grade, silent, which was exactly why it was so unsettling when it opened on its own, mid-vote. And a security guard named Foster leaned halfway through it, his face pale under the fluorescence. Chairman Prout, I'm sorry to interrupt, Foster said. There are 2 men in the lobby. They're saying they need to be in this room. I told them it's a closed session, and he swallowed. They didn't really ask again. They're just standing there, real still, like they're waiting for something. And Prute's jaw tightened, a man who did not enjoy having his procedures disrupted twice in one meeting. Who are they? They wouldn't say, sir. Just that it was about Dr. Donovan. Every head at the table turned toward Claire. For the first time since she'd sat down, something flickered behind her composure. Not fear, but a kind of tired recognition. Like she'd been half expecting this and had simply hoped it wouldn't come to it. Dr. Donovan, Prute said, an edge of triumph creeping back into his voice, like this too, was proof of something. Do you know these men? I might, Claire said. Depends which two. Shall we vote first or wait to find out? Prute asked the room, and a few of the board members actually laughed, a short, nervous sound that died fast. Beat 3. Numbers grow. Foster hadn't even fully closed the door before it opened again, harder this time. A second guard, younger, out of breath, appeared behind him. Sir, there's more of them now. 3 vehicles just pulled into the loading dock. Black SUVs, no plates. Nobody's shown ID, nobody's raised their voice. They're just, he searched for the word, positioned. Around the building. 2 by the ambulance bay, 1 by the stairwell. 1 by this door. A murmur went through the boardroom. One of the older board members actually stood up, chair scraping loud against the tile. Prute slammed his still, unused pen down on the table, the first genuinely rattled gesture Claire had seen from him all morning. This is a hospital, nada. I don't know what you think is happening, but nobody storms a credentialing hearing. Foster, call hospital security. Call the... Sir, Foster said, hospital security is who told me. They said these men identified themselves by rank when they were asked to stand down, and after that, security decided not to press it. They're not being aggressive, they're just not moving. Bay rank. Prute repeated, and for the first time, something in his face changed, not humility, not yet, but the particular unease of a man realizing the shape of the story he'd been telling might not be the shape of the story that was actually true. He looked down at the folder in front of him, at the words forward, deployed naval special warfare elements, and for one uncomfortable second, he didn't look nearly so certain of them being fiction. Beat 4. The chairman Diggs in Prute stood, smoothing the front of his jacket. Visibly working to recover the authority the last 5 minutes had chipped away from him. I don't care whose rank they're claiming. This is a private credentialing hearing on private hospital property, and if they don't have business before this board, hospital security has every right to remove them. Foster, tell them the hearing is closed, and it is not, under any circumstance, up for negotiation. Sir, I already told them that, Foster said. The older one just said, understood, and didn't move an inch. Then call the police. I did that too, sir. Dispatch says 2 squad cars are already outside, and neither one's approaching the building. That landed differently than anything else Foster had said. Prute opened his mouth to respond, and that was when the color started draining out of his face for reasons that had nothing to do with the men in the lobby. Beat 5, the wrong kind of emergency. That was when Gerald Prute's hand went to his own chest. It wasn't dramatic at first. He pressed 2 fingers flat against his sternum, like he was steadying a hiccup, and reached for the water glass in front of him with his other hand. He knocked it over instead. Water spread dark across his legal pad, across the folder, blurring the ink of everything he'd built his case on. Chairman, the woman beside him said. Prute didn't answer. His face had gone the color of old paper, He tried to stand, using the table for leverage, and instead folded sideways out of his chair, one arm catching the edge of the dais and dragging his microphone down with him in a shriek of feedback that seemed to hang in the air a full second longer than it should have. For one full second, nobody in the room moved. 12 board members. 6 colleagues in the gallery, all of them frozen, staring at a man on the floor, at his lips already losing color, at the folder of his own certainty soaking through with spilled water. Claire was already out of her chair. RVL, she hit her knees beside Prout before anyone else had processed that he'd fallen, 2 fingers already at his throat, her whole demeanor shifting into something none of them had seen in the 6 minutes since she'd sat down. Not defensive, not careful, not performing composure for a room that had spent the morning doubting her. Just fast and certain and utterly without hesitation. His not breathing right, his airways swelling. Call it in, anaphylaxis or cardiac. I need epinephrine and I need it now, she said. And her voice had changed too, dropped into a register that carried over the room without her raising it at all. Denis. Bag in my coat. Side pocket go. Somebody get the crash cart from the second floor nurse's station. Don't wait for the elevator. Take the stairs. Denis was already moving, vaulting the gallery railing without a second thought. 2 residents scrambling after her. Prout's lips had gone a faint, wrong blue. His throat was closing, whether from stress, from an old allergy nobody in the room had ever known about, or from something worse. There wasn't time to diagnose it from a textbook. Claire tore his collar open, tilted his jaw, and when his airway didn't open enough on its own, she reached for the only tool within reach. The fountain pen he'd never used, still lying where it had rolled off the table. She snapped it in 2, emptied the ink cartridge onto the carpet with one hard shake, and, with the same flat, mechanical calm she'd used 100 times in Bay 6, in places far worse lit and far less safe than this, pressed her fingers to the notch below his Adam's apple, found the cricothyroid membrane by feel alone, and made the incision. Somewhere behind her, a board member made a sound like he might be sick. It was in that exact moment, with Claire's hands bloody and steady and the hollow plastic tube of a dismantled pen serving as an airway, that the boardroom door opened for the 3rd time. 3 men stepped through it. 2 wore plain civilian jackets, but stood like they'd never once in their lives worn anything comfortably. The 3rd, older, moved half a step ahead of them, silver at his temples, a challenge coin turning over and over in his hand without him looking at it. The kind of habit a man picks up when his hands need something to do besides shake. He took one look at the room, at the fallen chairman, at the woman on her knees over him, wrist deep in a field airway built out of office supplies. "That's her," he said, quietly, to the 2 men behind him. Then, louder, to the room, "Everybody stay back and let her work. Do not touch that airway." A Prout's chest rose, faint, uneven, but it rose. The older man crossed the room in 4 strides and crouched on the opposite side of Prout's body, watching Claire's hands with the specific, informed attention of a man who had seen this exact procedure done exactly once before, a long time ago, somewhere much farther from a hospital than this. "Lieutenant Commander Donovan," he said. "Doc, it's Ostrander." Claire didn't look up. Her hands didn't stop moving. "Ray, bad timing. Story of my life," Ostrander said. He turned his head toward the stunned board. "Lieutenant Commander Ray Ostrander, United States Navy, retired platoon commander, Naval Special Warfare Group 3. I flew 4 hours and drove the last 40 minutes because I heard somebody in this building was trying to prove this woman doesn't exist. He nodded once at Claire. Still working. She kept an airway open on one of my men in the back of a blacked-out Chinook, at night, under fire, with worse tools than a hospital pen. She did it twice more that deployment that I personally witnessed. I flew every one of your fictional 3 years alongside her, ma'am, and I will happily put that in writing, in triplicate, for whoever needs it. But I'd rather you all just watch what she's doing right now and draw your own conclusions. One of the two operators behind Ostrander. Younger. Quieter, a puckered burn scar visible just above his collar. Crouched down without being asked and started clearing space around Claire's knees. Moving chairs, giving her room to work the way a corpsman clears a landing zone. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. Claire recognized the economy of motion immediately. The particular calm of a man who had held pressure on a wound while the world caught fire around him. And for just a moment, something in her face softened, the tension of the last hour draining out through her hands. Vitals are climbing, she said, more to herself than anyone else, fingers back at Prute's throat, timing his pulse against her own heartbeat. Stay with me, Chairman. You're not done yet. Nobody argued with any of it. Nobody could. The proof was on the floor, and it was breathing. AFTRMATH. The paramedics arrived 9 minutes later to find Gerald Prute stable, pale, and staring up at the ceiling with the specific, hollow expression of a man doing very fast, very unwelcome arithmetic. He didn't speak while they transferred him to the gurney. He didn't speak while they checked his pressure, his pulse. The crude but effective airway that had kept him alive long enough for real equipment to arrive. It wasn't until they'd lifted him, and he was being wheeled past the boardroom table, past his own folder, still open, still full of Claire's supposedly non-existent years, the ink now running in long gray streaks across the page, that he finally reached out and caught her sleeve. "Doctor," he said. His voice was thin, scraped raw from the tube now sitting where a fountain pen once had. "Donovan. Save your breath, Chairman," Claire said. "You'll want it. I need to say." He stopped, swallowed, tried again. "I built a very good case against you." "On paper, you did," Claire agreed. There was no triumph in it. She'd heard confessions like this before, in worse rooms, from better men. Paper's not always where the truth lies. Prute's eyes were wet, and it wasn't only the trauma of the last 10 minutes. "I called you a liability in front of your colleagues. I called your service record a story." He gripped her sleeve tighter. The closest thing to an apology his body could manage before the paramedics eased his hand loose. "You didn't have to be the one who—" "There wasn't anybody else in the room who knew how," Claire said simply. "That's not forgiveness, Chairman. That's just the job." He didn't answer. He didn't have anything left to say that wouldn't sound smaller than what had just happened to him. And for the first time in 11 years of chairing that board, Gerald Prute looked like a man who understood exactly how small a title can be, measured against a pair of steady hands. The gurney rolled him out. The boardroom sat in silence, broken only by the low murmur of Ostrander giving Foster instructions on where his men could safely wait outside, and by Denise, still standing at the gallery railing, one hand pressed flat over her mouth, tears cutting silent tracks down her face, not for Prute, and not even entirely for Claire, but for the sheer, staggering weight of watching someone she thought she knew turn out to be so much more than the file anyone had ever kept on her. Later, alone in the hallway, Ostrander found Claire, scrubbing dried blood off her hands in a utility sink, staring at nothing. "You didn't have to come," she said, not looking up. You didn't have to save the man who tried to end your career, Ostrander said. We're both a little stupid that way. He leaned against the wall beside her. For what it's worth. The board rescinded the vote before Pruitt's gurney cleared the parking lot. Unanimous. The younger one. The woman who spoke up for you. She made sure it's in the minutes that the complaint was, quote, without foundation and unbecoming of this board's conduct. Dr. O'Caffer found her a few minutes later, still by the sink, and didn't say anything at first. Just stood there, arms crossed, watching the water run pink and then clear over Claire's knuckles. I voted no, O'Caffer finally said, for what it's worth. I want you to know that before you hear anything else about today. I know you did, Claire said. I heard you. I should have said more than no. I should have asked who signed the complaint in the first place. O'Caffer's jaw tightened. That's on me, not just him. You can ask now, Claire said, drying her hands. I'd be curious to hear the answer myself. Claire allowed herself, finally, the smallest exhale of something like relief. Tell your men thank you for not kicking the door down. They wanted to, Ostrander said. I told them you'd have handled it worse if we made a scene. He straightened, coin still turning in his fingers. Doc, it's good to see you standing in a room with lights that don't flicker, for once. Rassol U2ION 6 months later. The plaque outside Ridgemont's trauma wing reads differently than it used to. Dr. Claire Donovan's name sits at the top now, under a new title. Director of Trauma Surgery. Gerald Pruitt is no longer chairman, but he still sends a card every year, on the date, and every year it says the same 2 words above his signature, still breathing. She keeps the fountain pen, cleaned, capped, and useless for writing ever again, in the top drawer of her desk. Not as a trophy, just a reminder that the proof was never in the file. It was always in the work. Ray Ostrander still calls once a year. Usually on the anniversary of a deployment neither of them talks about with anyone else. He never asks how she's doing. He just asks if the lights are still on when she needs them, and she tells him yes, and that's the whole conversation, and it's enough. If Claire's story moved you, take a moment to hit that like button and let us know. Share it with someone who believes real strength doesn't need a paper trail to prove itself, and subscribe to Valor Unspoken for more stories of quiet competence standing up against loud judgment. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done in that boardroom in those first 6 minutes?